Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Dani is on the verge of uncovering a secret so large it threatens to fracture everything she thought she knew about the people closest to her. In the days following Chelsea's sudden disappearance, the house had already become a place of sharp edges and whispered doubts. Dani's nerves were frayed by sleepless nights and unanswered questions. Her concern for Chelsea gnawed at her, an unrelenting ache that left her hyper-aware of every odd glance, every half-formed sentence left hanging in the air. Yet it was not Chelsea's absence alone that unspooled her sense of safety. It was what she began to notice about Hayley and Randy. At first, they were just subtle fragments, too slippery to hold on to. A phone call cut short when Dani walked into the room. A nervous laugh Hayley tried to cover by drinking water too quickly. A look Randy gave Hayley that wasn't friendly, wasn't professional, but lingered in the silent space between them. Dani's breaking point arrived in a rush. She had been tracing Chelsea's steps, desperate to find any lead. As she pieced together fragments of rumor and speculation, her search intersected unexpectedly with Hayley's private life. The discovery wasn't a physical object, no paper trail or text message she could hold up as proof. Instead, it was the culmination of half-hidden moments that finally coalesced into a picture she could no longer ignore. The truth about Hayley and Randy's relationship slammed into her consciousness with the force of a nightmare. It wasn't simply that they knew each other. It was the intimacy of it, the undeniable bond that bent toward something deeper, something secretive, possibly even dangerous. Bill's wife would allow herself to be entangled with Randy of all people. Her panic surged when the call finally came through. Chelsea had been found, alive, shaken but safe. The relief should have swallowed her whole. Instead, Dani felt the walls of her world closing in tighter. She needed to tell Bill, needed to lay this entire twisted mess at his feet before the rot spread further. Racing toward him, she rehearsed the words, how she would balance the urgency with the tenderness needed to break his heart carefully. But fate had other plans. She didn't find Bill. Instead, what she stumbled upon was a conversation she was never meant to hear. Voices bled through the thin crack of a half-shut door, each word sharpening Dani's fear. Randy's tone carried familiarity, the ease of someone not merely plotting but reminiscing. Hayley's voice was softer, defensive at times, coaxing at others. Their discussion confirmed everything Dani had suspected and magnified her horror tenfold. They weren't just careless companions, they were bound in some shadowy alliance that placed Bill directly in harm's way. The suspicion dug its claws into her. Why had Hayley married Bill? Dani's mind refused to accept the picture-perfect story Hayley presented to the world. The timing, the secrecy, the unexplained silences all lined up too neatly, suggesting calculation rather than romance. Dani considered the possibility that Hayley wanted Bill's wealth, his influence, his standing. But then the darker layer revealed itself, Randy's presence. He wasn't just a bystander. His history with Joey made him a dangerous variable. Joey was notorious for the way his grudges played out, messy, unforgiving, always leaving collateral damage. And if Randy once operated in Joey's world, then Randy carried both the knowledge and the ruthlessness that could unravel Bill's career in an instant. Dani's fear crystallized into dread. Randy didn't need to simply wait for Hayley's charm to work on Bill's defenses. He could strike at any moment. Bill was exposed in ways he couldn't even imagine, living under the same roof as the very people plotting his downfall. Dani wanted to scream the truth, to warn Bill, but the evidence was still shadows. If she went too early, she risked being dismissed as paranoid. Worse, she could tip off Hayley and Randy, making them double down, tighten their secrets, or accelerate whatever plan they were brewing. Meanwhile, Doug's reappearance turned the entire stage into an even more dangerous arena. Doug had known Randy in another lifetime, back before respectability was even a concept either man entertained. Their reunion was like the striking of a match, a dangerous spark in a room already filled with gas. Doug's vendetta against Joey had aged like spoiled wine, more bitter, more acrid, impossible to swallow but impossible to abandon. Doug saw Randy not as a liability but as a weapon, a bridge into the very empire he wanted to dismantle. To Doug, Randy represented opportunity, knowledge of Joey's inner workings, The kind of inside track that could topple a man like Joey if wielded correctly. For Randy, the allure wasn't merely about Doug's revenge. It was about profit. If they moved carefully, if they played the chessboard with precision, Joey's empire could be carved up, his assets taken, his reputation dismantled. And once Joey was weakened, Bill's fortune be then within Randy's reach through Hayley would represent the second conquest. To Randy, it was not a matter of loyalty to Hayley or even Doug. It was a matter of timing, of striking when both opportunities aligned so he could emerge with everything. Hayley, however, found herself pinned by the growing pressure of Dani's suspicion. Dani's eyes lingered too long, her questions came too sharp, her presence too constant. Hayley's instincts told her Dani had heard something. She confessed this fear to Randy in hurried whispers, her voice trembling not with guilt but with the terror of being caught too soon. She insisted they needed to end the charade of her pregnancy. It had been a useful tool, a manipulative tether to keep Bill invested emotionally, but now it had become a ticking bomb. If Bill began to push, if he demanded medical confirmation or pressed too hard, the entire fabrication would shatter. Randy, less sentimental, weighed the risk. The pregnancy hoax had bought them time, but time could quickly turn against them. The longer they prolonged it, the greater the chance Bill would stumble onto the truth. Hayley urged him to support her plan, end the pretense, reframe it as a miscarriage, and reassert her vulnerability to keep Bill sympathetic. It wasn't elegant, but it was necessary. Bill himself, blissfully unaware of the threads weaving around him, encouraged Hayley to focus on her health. His advice was simple, born of concern rather than suspicion. The dream of children could wait until she was stronger. But in Hayley's ears, his words were a threat. If Bill wasn't eager to press forward, then the pregnancy angle no longer held him. She would need another anchor, another way to bind herself to his trust before Dani's whispers or Randy's impatience destroyed everything. Dani, caught in this labyrinth of secrets, wrestled with her own next move. She wanted to protect Bill, but she also wanted to protect herself from the storm she was sure was coming. She replayed the conversation she overheard, dissecting every phrase, every hesitation in Hayley's voice. She wondered if Chelsea's disappearance, brief as it was, tied into this larger scheme. Had Chelsea known too much? Was her vanishing act truly random, or had it been orchestrated to silence her? The timing was too neat, the recovery too sudden. Chelsea being found alive brought relief, but Dani couldn't shake the suspicion that it was staged, a controlled scare to divert attention or test the boundaries of loyalty among them. The night stretched longer for Dani. She moved through the house like a ghost, listening for signs, watching for cracks. Hayley became a master of performance, smiling with practiced grace, leaning on Bill's arm with just the right weight of dependence. Randy lingered on the periphery, his presence explained away as convenience, business, or coincidence. Yet in the charged space between Hayley and Randy, Dani saw the truth, an invisible thread pulling them closer no matter how far they pretended to stand apart. Doug's plotting added another dimension to Dani's fear. She didn't yet understand the depth of his reunion with Randy, but she sensed movement, subtle shifts in the air, conversations that ended too quickly when she walked in. Doug wasn't an innocent bystander. His history with Joey gave him reason to meddle, to twist alliances for his own benefit. If Doug was pulling Randy deeper into his schemes, then Bill wasn't facing a single betrayal, was standing in the middle of a three-way power play, each side more ruthless than the last. The tension mounted, each day layering dread upon dread. Dani's sense of urgency sharpened into obsession. She started keeping notes, writing down fragments of overheard conversations, tracking the moments Hayley slipped or Randy hesitated. She imagined herself building a case, a shield she could eventually present to Bill to protect him from the trap closing around him. But with each passing day, the line between paranoia and truth blurred. Dani questioned her own sanity at times. Was she inventing connections out of grief for Chelsea's scare? Was she reading too much into gestures, glances, silences? The weight of uncertainty gnawed at her, yet her instincts screamed the danger was real. Hayley, desperate to maintain control, began recalibrating her strategy. She tested Bill's patience, gauging how far his concern for her health could be stretched into devotion. She needed him tethered emotionally, but not suspicious. She tried to reframe her fragility as strength, portraying herself as a woman fighting through hardship with resilience. Bill responded with affection, exactly as she hoped. But Dani saw the performance for what it was. Every smile, every tear, every tender word Hayley spoke was a blade, sharpened for manipulation. Randy, meanwhile, grew restless. His conversations with Doug had planted seeds of ambition that outpaced Hayley's cautious pacing. Randy didn't want to wait for Bill's fortune to fall neatly into his hands. He wanted leverage now. He wanted a plan that didn't rely on Hayley's deceptions alone. He hinted at this in their late-night talks, his voice hard with impatience. Hayley begged him to stay patient, reminding him that their advantage lay in subtlety, in not tipping their hand too soon. But Randy's hunger was growing, and hunger rarely waits. For Dani, the realization was chilling. She wasn't just watching a fragile marriage corrode under secrecy, she was standing at the edge of something darker, something violent. The stakes weren't limited to heartbreak or betrayal. They involved power, wealth, vengeance, and possibly blood. The uneasy balance could not hold forever. Dani's watchfulness became sharper, almost predatory, as she pieced together more fragments of Hayley and Randy's secretive alliance. She was no longer merely suspicious, she was convinced, and her conviction made her bold. Yet she knew exposing the truth to Bill required precision. If she moved too soon, she risked being discredited. If she waited too long, Bill might become another casualty in Randy's ruthless pursuit of power. The danger pressed against her chest every time she saw the two of them exchange even the briefest glance. Randy himself was shifting into a more volatile state. Doug's influence was undeniable. Doug had rekindled in him a hunger that went beyond subtle manipulation. Their late-night meetings had become brainstorming sessions of betrayal, each man pushing the other further into dangerous territory. Doug's fixation on Joey made him reckless, but Randy thrived on the recklessness. He had grown tired of hiding in the shadows of Hayley's marriage, of waiting for the slow drip of inheritance and manipulation. He wanted decisive action. Doug encouraged this impulse, knowing Randy's willingness to act could be the knife aimed at Joey's empire. Hayley, on the other hand, felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. She had always relied on her ability to control narratives, to weave lies into comforting shapes, but Dani's eyes followed her everywhere. Dani's silence was more dangerous than any accusation. It meant she was calculating, biding her time. The fear that Dani might reveal the truth to Bill gnawed at Hayley until she could hardly sleep. And Randy's impatience only amplified her anxiety. He wanted to accelerate their plans, while she still clung to the fragile mask of her role as Bill's devoted wife. Bill himself remained oblivious, lost in the fog of misplaced trust. His focus was on protecting Hayley, ensuring she felt safe and supported, never suspecting that the woman at his side was plotting his downfall. His kindness was his weakness. Every tender gesture he offered Hayley was twisted into leverage she could use. He spoke often of his career, his projects, his fears of public scandal. To Bill, Hayley was a confidant. To Hayley, his words were weapons, secrets to be stored and wielded later if needed. The danger deepened when Doug's plotting began to intersect with Bill's world in ways Dani could sense but not yet explain. Doug was no longer satisfied with whispers of revenge. He wanted Randy to prove his worth, to act boldly. One possibility began to take shape in their hushed conversations: removing Bill from the equation entirely. His fortune, his reputation, his resources could all be redirected if he were weakened financially, socially, or even physically. Randy's history with Joey meant he had the tools and the knowledge to make it happen. Doug supplied the motivation, and together they began to chart a course that made Dani's worst fears seem tame by comparison. Dani's mind raced. She replayed every word she had overheard, every detail that hinted at Randy's capacity for violence. The thought that Bill might be marked for destruction at the hands of a man living so close unsettled her to the point of desperation. She considered warning Chelsea. She even considered confronting Randy directly, testing the limits of his patience to see if he might reveal something in anger. But Dani understood the risk. Randy wasn't a man who tolerated pressure well. Pushing him too far could result in immediate danger, not just for her, but for everyone tangled in his schemes. Hayley's fear of being exposed by Dani drove her to propose a desperate maneuver. She and Randy argued about it late into the night. She insisted they could no longer rely on the fabricated pregnancy, that they needed a new narrative to keep Bill under control. Perhaps it would be an accident, a sudden health crisis that forced Bill into a caretaker role so deep he wouldn't have time to question anything else. Perhaps it would be a financial entanglement, a staged crisis that positioned Hayley as his savior rather than his betrayer. Randy sneered at her caution. He wanted action, not theater. To him, Bill's fortune was an obstacle to be seized, not a treasure to be courted. Doug fanned the flames by feeding Randy's ego. He painted pictures of a future where they had stripped Joey of his power and claimed Bill's wealth in the same stroke. Randy began to imagine himself as more than Hayley's partner in deception. He saw himself as the orchestrator, the man pulling all the strings. This shift unsettled Hayley. She realized with dread that Randy's ambitions might not include her for long. If he grew too powerful, if he seized Bill's assets and aligned too closely with Doug, Hayley might become disposable, just another pawn to be discarded. Dani sensed this tension without fully understanding its contours. She saw cracks forming between Hayley and Randy, brief arguments that ended in cold silence, stolen glances filled with barely restrained fury. She understood enough to know that alliances built on greed and deception rarely held. If she could widen the fissure, if she could pit them against each other, she might create an opening to save Bill. But the danger of miscalculation weighed heavily on her. If Hayley discovered Dani's hand in sowing division, she would strike back with venom. If Randy uncovered it, the consequences could be lethal. The question of Chelsea's disappearance lingered, unresolved, like a puzzle piece that refused to fit. Dani could not dismiss the possibility that Chelsea had been caught in the crossfire of these dangerous games. Her sudden return, safe and unharmed, gnawed at Dani. It felt too neat, too orchestrated, as though someone had staged it to calm suspicion. Dani wondered if Randy or Hayley had a hand in it, using Chelsea's scare as a distraction, a way to keep Dani emotionally unstable and therefore less credible. If that was true, it meant Chelsea had been used as a pawn in a game far more ruthless than Dani had dared to imagine. The stage was set for a collision. Randy's hunger for power was accelerating. Doug's thirst for revenge against Joey was boiling over. Hayley's desperation to maintain her mask was unraveling. Dani's determination to protect Bill was sharpening into something dangerously close to obsession. And Bill, still blind to the storm around him, walked willingly into the trap being laid at his feet. Tension tightened its grip on every interaction. Dinner conversations became minefields of unspoken accusations. Every smile carried double meanings. Every silence was loaded with secrets. Dani, clutching her notes and fragments of overheard words, prepared herself for the inevitable moment when she would have to act. She imagined Bill's face when she told him the truth. She imagined his disbelief, his hurt, his anger. But she also imagined his survival, and that image gave her the strength to continue. Hayley plotted her next move with icy calculation. She knew Dani was a threat, but she also knew Dani's position was precarious. Without solid evidence, Dani risked appearing hysterical. Hayley resolved to manipulate Bill further, to plant seeds of doubt about Dani's stability. If she could convince him that Dani's obsession with Chelsea's disappearance had tipped into paranoia, then anything Dani revealed would be dismissed as delusion. It was a cruel strategy, but cruelty was Hayley's currency. Randy's path was darker. He no longer spoke of patience. He spoke of opportunities, of timing, of decisive blows that would reshape the entire playing field. Doug egged him on, whispering promises of wealth and power that made Randy's pulse race with anticipation. He envisioned Bill removed, Hayley sidelined, and himself standing at the center of it all. And through it all, Dani watched, listened, and prepared. She was no longer merely a bystander in the twisted drama unfolding around her. She was the one variable no one had fully accounted for. The one person willing to risk everything to protect Bill, even if it meant sacrificing her own safety. She didn't yet know how the story would end, but she knew the final act was coming. The convergence of motives, lies, and betrayals was no longer a question of if, it was only a question of when. The night the lies finally collided began without ceremony. Rain slicked the windows, casting blurred streaks of light across the glass as though the house itself were crying. Dani sat at her desk, her notes spread out like evidence for a trial she had yet to begin. Every overheard word, every subtle gesture, every thread of connection between Hayley, Randy, and Doug was etched into her pages. She had reached the point of no return. Tomorrow, she told herself, Bill would know the truth. She couldn't wait for more proof. She couldn't wait for the perfect moment. If she delayed, there might not be a Bill left to save. But Randy had made his decision too. Doug's persistence had lit a fire in him that Hayley could no longer cool. The plan was simple in its cruelty. Bill would suffer a sudden financial catastrophe, the kind that would not only destroy his career but leave him vulnerable and desperate. From there, Randy would maneuver the chaos into opportunity, seizing assets, silencing questions, and ensuring his dominance. Doug wanted Joey's ruin, Randy wanted Bill's fortune, and both men were too blinded by greed to see the peril of intertwining goals. Hayley realized too late that Randy's ambitions had grown larger than her own. For all her manipulations, she had wanted control through subtlety, not the blunt force Randy envisioned. Her fabricated pregnancy, her carefully spun lies, her attempt to portray herself as the devoted wife they were meant to erode Bill's strength slowly, not destroy him overnight. Now she found herself trapped between a man she no longer fully controlled and a husband she could not betray without shattering her mask. Her fear curdled into desperation, but desperation rarely breeds wisdom. Dani's instincts told her something was about to happen. Every nerve in her body hummed with anticipation. She could feel the storm in the air, as though the walls themselves held their breath. She resolved to act that night. She would find Bill, confront him privately, and reveal the truth. The risk of disbelief no longer mattered. What mattered was getting him away from the jaws closing around him. The confrontation erupted not in whispers but in shouts. Dani cornered Bill in his study, her words tumbling out with urgency, her voice cracking under the weight of everything she had carried. She spoke of Hayley's false pregnancy, of Randy's intimacy with her, of the overheard conversations that spoke of plots and betrayal. Bill's face shifted from confusion to horror to anger in rapid succession. He wanted to deny it, to protect the woman he loved, but Dani's conviction was unshakable. Her evidence, though circumstantial, was overwhelming. Before Bill could process it all, Randy arrived. He hadn't intended to walk into a confrontation, but the raised voices drew him like a predator sensing blood. The tension exploded into chaos. Bill turned on Randy with fury, demanding answers, demanding to know the truth of his relationship with Hayley. Randy smirked, his arrogance finally unmasked. He admitted enough to sting but withheld enough to maintain power. His confidence came from Doug, from the plan already in motion, from the knowledge that he held the upper hand. Hayley tried to intervene, her voice trembling as she attempted to spin one last lie. She painted herself as misunderstood, manipulated by Randy, a victim of circumstance. But the cracks were too deep, and Bill's eyes finally saw through her carefully constructed facade. The betrayal hit him like a blow. The woman he had trusted above all else had been conspiring against him, and the man he had allowed into his life had been sharpening the knife behind his back. Doug entered the picture with the subtlety of a storm. He wasn't there to mediate, was there to escalate. His vendetta against Joey had reached a fever pitch, and he saw in this eruption an opportunity to push Randy further, to force a decisive act. But Doug underestimated Dani. She stood her ground, her voice rising above the chaos, exposing Doug's manipulation as well. She linked his presence to Joey's history, laying bare the truth that this wasn't merely about Bill's fortune but about a vendetta spiraling out of control. The room fractured into competing truths, each voice louder than the last. Bill demanded clarity, Dani insisted on the danger, Hayley pleaded for forgiveness, Randy pushed for dominance, Doug urged for action. And then the shouting stopped, not by choice, but by inevitability. Randy lunged, his frustration finally boiling into violence. The move was reckless, fueled by ego rather than strategy. Bill fought back, his rage ignited by betrayal, but he was unprepared for Randy's ruthlessness. The struggle overturned furniture, shattered glass, and filled the air with the raw sound of survival. Dani screamed for them to stop, while Hayley clutched the wall, her mask of control finally shattered. Doug, true to his nature, did not intervene to save anyone, only watched, eyes calculating, waiting to see who would fall so he could seize the scraps. The climax came in a flash of violence that none of them could take back. Bill, though outmatched, managed to push Randy into a corner. But it was Dani who tipped the scale. Fueled by desperation, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, and brought it down between them. The blow stunned Randy, halting his assault and sending him sprawling. Silence followed, punctuated only by ragged breaths and the sound of rain hammering against the windows. Hayley collapsed, sobbing not from guilt, but from the realization that her carefully woven web had finally unraveled. Doug slipped away into the shadows, his plan with Joey unfinished but his opportunity gone. Randy, humiliated and defeated, was left powerless on the floor. And Bill, battered and bleeding, looked at Dani with new eyes. For the first time, he saw her not as a paranoid relative but as the only one who had truly protected him. The aftermath unfolded slowly, painfully. Bill severed ties with Hayley, her pleas falling on deaf ears. Randy's grip on power was broken, and Doug's vendetta lost its weapon. Yet the scars remained. Bill's career would bear the whispers of scandal, and Dani's sleepless nights would haunt her long after the storm had passed. Chelsea, though untouched by the violence, became a symbol of everything fragile in their world, reminder that innocence could be threatened by greed, and that safety was a fragile illusion. The story closed not with triumph but with survival. Dani's determination had saved Bill from destruction, but the cost was trust, peace, and the belief that the people closest to them were ever truly known. The gates they had crossed could not be closed again, and the shadows they had faced would linger, whispering reminders of how quickly loyalty could turn to betrayal. And yet, in the quiet that followed, there was also strength. Dani knew she had faced down the storm and endured. Bill, scarred but alive, understood the depth of the betrayal and the resilience it took to survive it. And in that fragile space between ruin and renewal, the possibility of rebuilding remained uncertain, but real.